Well, good morning, Grand Center Alliance Church. Happy to be with you. My name's Chris. I'm one of the pastors here. And I get to give you the third installment of our series called The Waiting Room. Bob did a great job last week, and many of our favorite biblical character, he highlighted the life of David and how David waited so well. What I realized this morning is that I have the negative ones and Bob has the positive ones. And I'm not sure if that's purposely done, but this is what I got. Just kidding. The things that we're doing and the stories that we're investigating and bringing to you are stories that are close to our heart, and I believe that God gave them to us. So we live in a fast-paced culture with an instant gratification addiction. This is one of the themes that we've reminded ourselves throughout this series so far. And we see this in everyone seems to be in a hurry, whether you're sitting behind your computer or in your car or in a line waiting for something. It just seems to be the same. And it seems that for us, waiting creates either anxiety or anger or both. And I would say probably usually a little of both. But we're not very good at waiting. And finally, just in this series, here's kind of why maybe the heart behind the whole series is that we don't want to miss the lessons that God has for us because we waited poorly. We want to learn how to wait well. And I think last week was just an incredible example, getting into Psalm 37 about how to wait and the principles that came out of that. And I think Bob just did a really good job unpacking that for us. And so we want to learn to wait well. One of the things, I think, the misconceptions about waiting is often that we think that waiting is simply something that we do in order to get something. And I think that's mainly the way we think about waiting. And I want to reshape that this morning. I just have a quote from John Ortberg here. It says, "Biblically, waiting is not just something we have to do until we get what we want. Waiting is part of the process of becoming what God wants us to be." And I think this is a really important concept, that the significance of waiting isn't actually getting what we want. It's actually God doing something in us, that we are becoming something, and God is using that wait time to do it. And kind of the way I want to frame this in the introduction of this sermon is it's this idea of form versus substance. God is after building substance, depth in us, and form is simply something that's shallow. So it's what I would like you to think of is like on a set for a movie. In the movie, you see all this whole town, and you see all these great things. But when you actually look at the set, it's all propped up, and it's just all you can see is the fronts. And of course, when the movie is done, it looks like a real town. And so that's what I mean by form, that these forms that they put up really to trick you into believing that this is real. See, that's not what God's after. He's not after you to look a certain way. That God is after transformation in your heart and renewal of your mind. And the Bible's really clear about that in a number of places. And so I have this illustration I think illustrates this very well. It comes from a 1980s movie called The Karate Kid. And we have what we have is Daniel, or Daniel's son, who's being bullied, and he really wants to learn how to fight and to defend himself. And he, in the movie, becomes friends with Mr. Miyagi, who is a master in karate. And so what we have is this great story of Daniel, who is just looking to figure out how to do kicks and chops. And Mr. Miyagi, who's not interested in just teaching Daniel how to fight. There's more to it than that. And so how I like to view this is it's like a storefront karate shop where you can just go and learn how to kick and punch and chop versus a master who knows the art and takes you further back to help you become what you didn't know to ask for. And so what we have in this movie is Mr. Miyagi shaping Daniel, and Daniel is not even really knowing it. And so we get to this point early on in the movie where Daniel's just tired of all of the seemingly menial tasks and unrelated tasks that Mr. Miyagi is giving him. And he's I'm done with it. I'm finished. And he storms out. And Mr. Miyagi comes out after him and talks to him, and then starts to do a little spar with him. And what Daniel's son realizes is all of these tasks were shaping him. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, I know how to defend because of the wax on, wax off, right? This is famous stuff. And so what we have here is Mr. Miyagi, who's a master, understanding something of very significant, is that he doesn't want Daniel just to be able to defend himself. He's not just looking to teach Daniel some skills. He wants Daniel to become something else. He wants him to become an artist. He wants to teach him not just the form. He wants to teach him the substance of the art. And I think that's a great illustration of what God wants to do in us. That God desires to build substance in us, character. And he's not interested in just the behavior. So Jesus is not interested simply in changing your behavior. He wants to transform your heart. And the issue with that and the issue with us is we don't wait well. And this is a slow process. That God is patient with us. He takes his time to build these things in us. And like a master, and Jesus, of course, is referred to the master in the New Testament, like the master, he's forming us into something of substance. And so that's one of the ways I just want us to think about waiting this morning as we get into our text, is that God is looking for a transformation, not just a certain way of behaving. And so our story for today is found in Exodus chapter 32. Very famous story. It's the story of the golden calf. And so if you want to turn there in your Bibles, it'll also be on the screen here beside me. We're going to pick the story up right actually in verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So just a little context here. What's happened is God has called Moses up onto the mountain. Just recently, God has given the 10 Commandments in an audible voice, the mountain's shaking and smoking, and it was just incredible. No one was allowed to touch the mountain on pain of death because God's glory was consuming the mountain. And so after that, the people are like, "Yeah, we'll do whatever you say." And then so they come. A little bit of time passes, and then God calls Moses up on the mountain to give him some instructions, and we'll actually unpack what those instructions were in a little bit here. But that just gives us a little bit of context of what's going on here. So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in your ears, that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. Now it's interesting the language that's being used here. It's meant to evoke something in us. For just a few chapters before in Exodus, the 10 Commandments were given. And the first 2 commandments here are broken in this one verse. And they even say he uses a tool to cast this idol. And so we have commands 1 and 2 broken in this moment. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now, it's translated play there, but this isn't just any kind of play. This is the Hebrew word behind this is sexual in nature, and so that's what it means by play. So anyway, let's keep going. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people." Interesting, right? God's calling the people Moses's. "Go down for your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt." So now he's saying that Moses brought them up, not him. Out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'These are our gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" And so what we have here, of course, is a very famous story, very well known. And what we want to find out in this is some lessons from this golden calf fiasco in Israel's inability to wait. And so the first thing that I think we learn from this story is that waiting exposes our idols. And what I mean by that is an idol is anything that's elevated to a place where it competes for lordship of your life. And so what we have of course, in our Exodus passage is they've actually made this image. It's very obvious, an idol. They've crafted it and worshipped it. But idols are not just physical representations of something. Idols are anything that we elevate to a spot where they shouldn't be in our lives. In fact, we elevate it to the place of God rather than in a place. It might even be a good thing, but it's elevated too high. And so that's how I want to think about it. And this idea of exposing idols, and we opened up by talking about form versus substance. What is coming out when an idol is present in your life is that something in your heart is revealed. This is the essence of where the idols come from. It was John Calvin that said that the human heart is an idol factory, that it is constantly producing idols. And as Christians, we are constantly in that battle to make sure those idols do not take the place of God in our lives. And there's many idols in our culture. But here's some of the ways that you can, we'll actually go through what some of those main ones are in a bit. But here's some of the ways that you can identify if you have an idol in your life or what idols are in your life. First of all, if you have any deal breakers with God, that is a huge indication that there's an idol in your life. And what I mean by that, a deal breaker is like, okay, God, you can have everything, but if this happens, or if this goes sideways, or if something happens to this person, or if I don't get this, or if you make me do this, deal's off. That's an indication that you have an idol in your life, that you've elevated something to the position of God. And then now it's competing with who should be in that spot, which is, of course, God himself. And so that's one of the ways to identify an idol. And I think that's maybe one of the main ways that we can find, okay, what is in our heart? What is off limits for God? Because that is the idol. Secondly, we find in our text here, is you sacrifice to it. So right away, Aaron's, we're like in verse 3 already, Aaron is making a collection. He's like, bring me all your gold, and we'll make an idol. So let's bring sacrifice. So one of the ways that you can kind of identify the idols in your life is to look at your checkbook. Where is your money going? What are you sacrificing for? If there's one thing that's constant and there's a ton of sacrifice for it over and over, it could be anything. It could be a job, it could be shopping, it could be comfort food, I don't know, it could be anything. But if you look at your bank account and your checkbook, what'll happen is you'll start seeing patterns. You'll start seeing where, okay, so this is where it's going. That's why I think budgeting is so important and such a good practice. It actually helps us to identify and keep the idols out as Christians, that we don't want to have these idols in our lives. Well, thirdly, so you have deal breakers, you sacrifice for it, and lastly, what we see right in our text is they have a big celebration. One of the ways to identify idols in your life is to see what you talk about, is to kind of pay attention to the things that you celebrate and talk about. And so that's what happens with idols. We celebrate them. Because they're in a spot that's lifted up, right? And so we're celebrating them. And so in our story, we have Aaron throwing this big feast and party going like, yes, let's celebrate these idols. This is kind of a natural thing that happens for us, is that we have this need to talk about it all the time. We have this need to celebrate it. And that's one of the indicators that you can kind of figure out, okay, so what are some idols or potential idols in my life by what I'm talking about, where my time is going, and my need to celebrate whatever it might be. And so that's the first thing I think lesson that we learn is waiting exposes our idols. The second thing that waiting does that we see in this text is waiting makes us forgetful of God's provision and goodness. And this is really obvious in this text. And before we start judging Israel, I want us to take a moment here and think about what is going on. So these people have been asked to wait. They are newly out of slavery. They don't really even know what freedom looks like. They have not been exposed to the God of Israel for very long. They have mostly been exposed to the Egyptian gods. And they know what the Egyptian gods are. I mean, that's why I'm pretty sure that's probably why they made the calf. It's one of the Egyptian gods. And so they're kind of babies a little bit. They don't understand how life is lived as a free person. And they haven't been worshiping Yahweh for very long. This is actually quite a short time. And so what we have here is these people, we're these people in the story. Like that's, again, we're not the hero. And I said this a couple weeks ago, we're not the hero in these stories. We're the ones that are that are identifying with the people that can't wait very well. And so this word isn't just kind of because, well, these guys can't believe they forgot. I mean, look at all the stuff that happened. Let's kind of get in here for a second. I mean, they didn't even know Moses that well. In fact, as for this Moses, they're like, who's Moses? Even the way it's mentioned in the text is really interesting. They're just kind of like, well, maybe he died. Maybe he fell. Like he had to go up on the mountain. Maybe he got like consumed by all of the smoke and fire that's up there. Maybe God killed him. We don't know. It's been 40 days. So that's like over a month. Maybe we should do something about it. So let's not get too hard on Israel here. So secondly, back to our point. Waiting makes us forgetful of God's provision and goodness. What Israel has been exposed to is some incredible things from God. And so let's just really quickly go through. They are under slavery. It's 400 years of their time in Egypt. Most of that as slaves. And so they have just recently been delivered. And in that deliverance, God has shown them all like his protection and provision while Egypt had to suffer through the plagues. Israel is watching as God is step by step delivering them. In fact, on the way to town, the Egyptians are so like wanting them to go and are probably fairly superstitious about stuff. So it says they plundered. The Bible says they plundered the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are giving them like gold, and because they were slaves, they didn't have anything, right? And so their Egyptians are funding them, which is crazy to think about. Like these are slaves. They witness God's deliverance and power at the crossing of the Red Sea. So they get to the Red Sea, and all of a sudden they realize that Pharaoh's army is coming after them, and they're hemmed in. What do you do? Oh no! What does God do? He provides a way. He opens up the Red Sea. They cross on dry land. Like seriously, dry land. And then it wasn't just them getting across and God saving them. God actually shows his power over the mightiest army of in the world at the time by defeating the army in one foul swoop by closing the water back over the Egyptian army. And so you have this is just like a short time before our story today. We have them witnessing the great scene at Mount Sinai where God audibly speaks and gives the 10 Commandments. Like, are you kidding me? In fact, they were so petrified at the end of this whole thing that they went to Moses and said, how about this? We'll make a deal with you. How about you go up and talk to God and then come down and tell us what he said, because we're terrified. Like, this is crazy. And so you have this incredible scene, and you can read it in Exodus. It's amazing. The mountain is smoking and shaking, and it's on fire but not being consumed. It's amazing. And the glory of the Lord descends on Mount Sinai. And so they have all this, and they have been the recipients of God's provision, his grace, and his care. And in fact, 2 times up to this point, they have affirmed that, yes, we will do the things that you've asked us to do. And so in a very short time, Israel forgets all that they were waiting. Israel forgets as they wait. Just a little side note here. One of the things that's revealed to us in this text is a human's need to worship is exposed. Again, this is a picture of humanity. This isn't just a story of Israel. It's a picture of humanity and what is in us, and that there's this need in us to worship. And we are born with a great thirst that drives us as we seek to quench it. And we will pull in all these things. In fact, that's, talking about idols, that's where the idols come in. It's this thirst that we have to quench, that just drives us to elevate these things over God. And in the end, of course, we know that the Bible gives us the picture that God is who quenches this thirst. All right, finally, let's go to our third lesson here. Waiting makes us adjust to God's timing. Now, here's what was going on the mountain. So God calls Moses to come up on the mountain and says, hey, we need to chat. And so Moses takes Joshua, goes up to the mountain, and God on the mountain starts outlaying how he's going to be present with his people. And so when you read in those chapters previous, God is just showing how things are going to work and how the tabernacle is going to be established so that God's presence can be with his people. So that's the story. That's actually the backstory of what's going on. And so what the people are doing is they're asking for their God to be present with them. And so what we have is actually a good desire from the people. We want our God with us. And so that's a good desire, isn't it? We want him present with us. The crazy thing is that's exactly what's going up on the mountain. But they're not willing to wait for God and his timing. So what do? Well, they craft their own gods to be present with them. And so as we go further on in the story, so that's the backstory, the end of the story is that when Moses comes down, he's got the tablets of stone. It says that the finger of God wrote the 10 Commandments on. He throws them down and breaks them. It's symbolism that the people have broken this covenant with God already. After this, and it starts in chapter 32, but Moses starts having this conversation with God and interceding for the people on their behalf. And there's a whole conversation where I think Moses is tested here, where God says, I'm going to destroy these people and make a nation out of you. Because Moses wasn't part of the waiting test. This is just this is an opinion kind of thing. I think God was testing him here. I'm going to make a nation of you. Moses is like, no. Don't destroy your people. Like, be merciful, be gentle on them. And so we have this great conversation. This is amazing, actually. It's one of the most incredible things that's ever happened in history. Moses' conversation with God. It's amazing. So you can catch that if you want to keep reading in chapter 32 and into chapter 33. And so during this conversation or during this time of Moses and God conversing, God says, he relents, says, okay, I won't destroy them. There is some bad things that happen. There is some punishment that happens as a result of this. But overall, God forgives and God gives grace to his people. And so then you have this conversation and Moses is asking God, are you going to go up with us? And God tells Moses, no, I'm going to send an angel, but I'm not going to be present with you, which is interesting because, of course, that whole time, or maybe a majority of the time, Moses is on the mountain. God is designing how he's going to be present with his people. And then what we have here is this conversation, and this is how this conversation, this is how it ends. Moses is having this back and forth with God, and Moses kind of gets to the point where he's like, if you're not with us, I'm not going to go. We can't go. We need your presence. Just an angel isn't good enough. We need your presence. And this is what he says. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else? And get this is one of the most incredible verses ever. What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? An amazing statement by Moses, that what distinguishes the people of God from all the other people on earth is God's presence. That is the most distinguishable quality, the presence of God. And so we have this incredible story, some great lessons for us. And so let's transition. What are some lessons in the waiting room for us this morning? Well, Paul kind of gives us what the lessons are from this passage. And I was thinking, I don't think I can preach this passage without putting this stuff from Paul in. This is the deal. This is what he's shooting for here. And so this is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, in the first 5 verses, he set it up and referred to this story. And this is what he says about it. Now, these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let everyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. One of the reasons why I wanted us to put ourselves in the position of Israel is because of that last verse. If you think you're standing, take heed lest you fall. That if you think that you're better than them, and if you think you would have made better decisions, if you think that the waiting wouldn't have affected you that way, take heed. If you think you are standing, lest you fall. And so, lessons from the waiting room, of course, as we see from Paul here, idols. What idols are waiting to be exposed in you? Like what idols? We've been waiting for 2 months? We've been under lockdown for 2 months. What has been coming out of your life? Is there a way for you to identify? Have you made some new deal breakers? Like, have you sacrificed or celebrated some things or talked to? Like, this is an opportunity for you to investigate. And I just want to talk really quickly about some of the primary gods of our culture. So we got money, probably the biggest god of all. And in fact, Jesus in the New Testament says very specifically, you cannot serve God and money. We have power, right? Power is a big one. Sex, maybe second, maybe even first now. Like sex has become one of the gods of our culture. And there's temples all over the place. There's temples on the internet. There's temples, strip clubs. I'd say those are temples to the god of sex. It's constant. It's all over the place. In fact, if you look at what the porn industry makes compared to all the other, or not all the other, but all of the professional sports leagues, all together combined, do not equal what porn makes in 1 year. Isn't that nuts? We think that athletes and oh wow, they make so much money and there's so much generated here. The porn industry just blows it out of the water. It's a huge god of our time. Comfort. This one's getting exposed, I think. The whole idea of comfort, the God of comfort. We just desire comfort. We're just always trying to be comfortable. And family. That's the big one for me. Family. I think that's one of the reasons for all the helicopter parenting that's out there. I think we've elevated family to a status that it shouldn't be. And so we have to be really careful. I know that's one for me. And if I'm thinking about deal breakers, they usually involve my family. So what idols has this waiting period exposed in you? Secondly, let's work hard not to forget God's faithfulness to us and to you in the past. It's so easy to forget. Isn't it so easy to identify with Israel here? God has just been faithful over and over and over throughout your whole life. And yet when the new thing comes up, it's like, oh no. Stress, anxiety, maybe God won't do what I want him to do, right? Isn't this constant in our lives? Let's make sure that the waiting isn't making us forget all the provision and all the ability we have to trust God because he's a good God and he is faithful. And finally, let's intentionally use this time of waiting for God to build something of substance in you. Let's not pretend. Let's not have, the forms up and so it looks like we're nice people. Let's get into the hard work of God building substance in us, building character. So there's I just want to end with a prayer. It's from A-Dub, A.W. Tozer, and it's a phenomenal prayer. Most of his prayers are really good. I really like them. This one is from the Pursuit of God. At the end of each chapter, he has a prayer, and this one specifically is about idols and priorities. And so this is my prayer, and it's A.W. Tozer's prayer, of course, and it's our prayer. O God, be thou exalted over my possessions. Nothing of earth's treasures shall seem dear unto me, if only thou art glorified in my life. Be thou exalted over my friendships. I am determined that thou shalt be above all, though I must stand deserted and alone in the midst of the earth. Be thou exalted above my comforts. Though it mean the loss of bodily comforts and the carrying of heavy crosses, I shall keep my vow made this day before thee. Be thou exalted over my reputation. Make me ambitious to please thee, even if as a result I must sink into obscurity and my name be forgotten as a dream. Rise, O Lord, unto thy proper place of honor, above my ambitions, above my likes and dislikes, above my family, my health, and even my life itself. Let me decrease that thou mayest increase. Let me sink that thou mayest rise above. Amen. Now it's my privilege to give you a benediction, and it's fun to think about here for a moment that this benediction that God gave to Moses and Aaron and how to bless his people is just shortly after all of these things that we've just read about. And it's a picture of who our God is, his graciousness and forgiveness. He wants to bless his people, even though they rebelled horribly in the worst way possible. In Numbers chapter 6, what we have is this incredible blessing, emphasizing who our God is, that he is such a gracious and kind God who desires to bless his people. And so the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.